Remote Collective because I wanted to create real solid content about people working remotely and what is it really like, because I live in Thailand where we have a bubble of everyone working remotely and a very nice lifestyle, but I feel bad for everyone stuck in corporate and I want to help. My background is in the legal field, so I worked in corporate law for 6 years in the US, and so I know what it feels like to be stuck in an office. I helped multiple law firms go paperless internally to set up remote work programs, and I do that now with mostly with SMEs. So I just find the whole thing very interesting to kind of like bridge the gap between people already working remotely and companies who want to set up remote work programs. All of that goes in line with like co-working, co-living, sharing economy, all the things that we all love. So I thought we'd bring together some people who are probably way more educated in this than I am, and Brittnee is going to moderate for us tonight. So I'm just going to let Brittnee take over.
Brittnee.
Everybody say hello.
Hello.
Hello. That's good. If you're excited to be here, raise your hand.
Hello.
There we go.
Kindergarten.
I'm going to let these two introduce themselves, but before we do that, can you just say, like, Simon, what are you looking for from this evening? What's the number one burning remote work? Do you know anything about remote work?
Not really, no. I'm just looking for different insights and how people are handling their remote work and things like that. I own a remote company, I work remotely, and yeah, looking to meet other people in the remote working industry as well.
Lovely. Mr. Shumsel, what's your burning remote question?
I work for a PR agency, but I'm going freelance next year, so January, so I'm just getting ideas.
You're planning to go freelance?
Well, I have my notice in, so.
That's so grown up. And how has remoting come up in your company over the years?
Well, as I was saying to people earlier, most of our clients are remote working. They're really keen on it because they're technology companies, so they're all into it and talk about it. But very few of them actually kind of take their own medicine. So it's quite interesting, sort of hearing them saying do all this stuff. But only a handful of them really got their hands on it really quickly.
Thank you. And lady next to Phil that I don't know the name of. Sorry.
I'm Nina.
Hello.
I'm a freelancer. I work remotely, but it depends from client to client on how open they are to doing this. So it's very rare that I go into a company and it's agreed as remote working. It's something that's negotiated along the way.
Yep.
So I'm looking for advice, tips on how do you actually go about finding companies that are actually open to this.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I just always assume that you can go remote working and then get really and I get upset when they don't. You know. So Carmen, how do you?
Well, I'm just here for you, Brittnee, and for Brittnee.
That's enough.
I'm here for it.
So
I work for Cobalt, which is a software that manages co-working spaces, and a lot of our clients do with remote work. Not all of them, but it's a big part of their businesses. I think personally, I'm interested in how remote work, how does like workers' rights related to when you let your workers go remote, and what are the security that you ensure your employees when you
Workers' rights. A very, very misty area in some places.
Yeah.
Lady again, who I don't know the name of.
Fiona.
Hello, Fiona. Thank you for coming.
I'm interested in networking and working remotely myself, and also how to monitor people that work for me.
Yeah. There's lots of software that can do that for you. And you did introduce yourself, but I've forgotten it. Martin.
No problem. I'm Martin.
Hello, Martin.
Like the car, Aston Martin.
Yeah.
I'm from originally Riga, Latvia, here on like a work trip and some vacation, and I'm trying to transition myself into like freelance work environment. I'm like generally in media business, like TV, movies, commercials, like different camera operator as a producer and stuff like that. Thinking about moving more to a freelance video editor, just trying to find maybe some contacts, some ideas, and some future collaborations and stuff like that. So getting the idea how the whole thing and ecosystem works basically.
So you're looking for the remote worker ecosystem?
Yeah, and opportunities how to like transition into that.
Thank you, Aston. Martin.
Yeah.
Mr. Ellis, the world's first remote worker.
Yeah, might actually be very early one thinking about that.
Wait, are you the one that's the first Twitter person in all of England? Is that
No,
you?
that's John from the Skiff.
Sorry, go on.
So I think two things. One, in building out a company that is fully remote, just getting ideas on how to build that culture well from the beginning, having had the opportunity, having our opportunity to build something that's 100% remote and have that kind of day one culture. One side, and then on the other side, for a lot of the organisations we're working with, it's a really big thing for them now. They're looking at making staff kind of remote, either just because they're saving money on desk space, or because they want to open up access to different sorts of talent and give people a bit of flexibility and a bit of lifestyle with it. So.
Cool. And you were there at the beginning of the internet, weren't you?
Yeah, I was very fortunate to have been around in the early days with both Tim and also Cisco Systems, which actually this whole kind of being able to work remotely, and the technology's been around since, I was talking about this in 1992, 1993, so it's a long journey that people have been on to actually build remote organisations.
1992, that was also when Ice-T's OG Gangster album came out too. Alistair, what about you, sir?
I've just been through meeting Brittnee. I've just been really interested in remote working. I work with at any point about 15 companies advising on marketing, and I'm mindful of trying to recommend talent to them. So I often recommend freelancers. So I'm always interested in building out my network of experts I can recommend, but also just seeing how even in the last year, what co-working is kind of the future. Sound like I'm sorry, but it's like it is, and I can see the conversations that are going on in the UK about co-working. So it's also for me just to get a bigger understanding of the ecosystem and what's happening.
Cool. And you did introduce yourself. What was it?
Billy
Billy from And & Co.
Yes, I work for a company called & Co. We are a hot desking floating office service which essentially partners with restaurants, coffee shops and mainly hotels, and then we basically turn them into hot desking spaces. So instead of joining a WeWork for £500, you can join & Co for £20 a month, and that gets use of nearly 100 spaces across London. I'm here to just advertise & Co, and anyone who's interested to learn more about & Co, then give me a shout.
And what's interesting about remote work from your
What
perspective?
interests me?
Yeah.
From my own perspective, I have to move around quite a lot to I can't sit in one place for more than probably 2 or 3 hours. And I speak to all of my friends, and they're like, I work, till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I just don't get any work done after lunchtime.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that a lot of people have that issue. And if we can, as a company & Co, support people moving around wherever you're situated for a meeting or whatever you're doing, I feel like that's a good service to offer.
Ladies who's just joined us, do you have just to put you on the spot there, we're just saying about the first time we kissed.
Am I in the right session?
Do you have a particular burning remote question, or what's in your interest in remote work, or?
I don't have a question off the top of my head. Just wanted to hear more information, and was possibly looking into either outsourcing work or
yeah. That's good. Okay, and now to Pilar and David. Do you want to give a little kind of,
David, you can go first.
No, you go first.
Okay.
Polite.
What should we say?
Should we just say how we met?
Yes,
Yeah.
at a podcasting
thing.
So my name is Pilar Orti, and I run the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, and that was the start of me looking into remote work. So
That was like 5 years ago.
maybe
Longer than that.
Yeah, it's quite a while. And it's all changed a lot. I was having a conversation. So it started, of course, virtual teams, etc., have been around for ages, like you were saying, in global organizations. But what I find really exciting is that technology has enabled loads of people. It's become so accessible to work. For me, with people that you really want to work, with people who are right for the job, rather than for the people who are closest or can travel to where you are based. So So I started this and I started to look around what was going on. I joined a company called Happy Melly, which is now Management 3.0, and I spent a year with them. It's a small remote team, and I got completely immersed into what is possible. I was in tears when I left. I'd only met one of them in person, but I just knew everyone, and I discovered that actually I can build strong relationships online. So I thought, okay, well, there might be other people who can do that. So my company name is called Virtual Not Distant, and I help teams transition to remote, and mainly organizations that are saying, hey, you know what? Some people are starting to say that they don't want to come into the office every day. Some people are getting really tired from the commute. Some people are not well and cannot come into the office every day, etc., etc. But how can we transfer that team spirit and that teamwork that is so linked to being together? How can we transfer that into, it doesn't matter where we are. So that's what I'm trying to do. It's a lot of fun. And I love the transition. That is what that's really interesting for me. So, and I do lots of other stuff that I think I want to hear from Sir next to me.
Dangerous,
okay.
Dave Keane.
Okay, so David Keane, when did we meet?
We met at...
Was it that Seth
not
Godin thing?
Not that I've been rehearsing this. We met at Salesforce, Cloudforce thing in the Excel Centre, and we were tweeting, and you went, you look interesting, Bernie. And we met for a coffee, and you went, is that it?
We didn't kiss.
No, we didn't kiss.
That was later.
And then, yeah, we just like, and then I'd sort of turn up at Google for scrounge of breakfast every so often.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably our greatest triumph is when, this is why it's always good to know someone like Dave, because do you know Mitch Joel, the legendary podcaster? And me and our friend Andy were podcasting with Mitch Joel, and he said, oh, I'll be in town next week, maybe we can do something. And I went, I know someone at Google. And then I rang up Dave, and he went, oh, if you've got Mitch Joel, sure.
Yeah.
And that was it. We did a live with Mitch Joel, which I've been trading off ever since.
And we did the Seth Godin thing, where we hosted Seth.
What's that?
That was me.
That was you.
Really?
Okay, so tell people what
Anyway, so we're going to go for beers.
I've got a few more people to name drop, but I mean...
Anyway, so I guess my first, David Keane, currently work for a small fintech, just left Google after 7 years. My first co-working was in 1982. That sounds awful, doesn't it? I feel like I'm 400 years old. When I was at school, I was a games programmer. So I was quite a good games programmer for the Sinclair Spectrum, and I'm really dating myself here, and I managed to get a job writing subroutines, assembly language subroutines from home for this company in Liverpool who was producing video games, who was featured in a recent Netflix movie that had multiple endings. I think you know the one that's in there, so that's where that, you know the story, anyway. So moved into tech, worked for a lot of big tech companies, worked for Oracle, SAP, Salesforce, Google. A company down in the middle, it says big tech. I'm now in fintech. My experience is more about working remotely, working globally, managing teams remotely, particularly. So I can probably talk a lot about how you manage remote teams, how you set objectives appropriately, how you build culture with remote teams, how you manage remote workers who don't want to be remote workers, who are like, I want to come into an office. Well, why can I not come into an office? So managing all of those things, I've always bridged from Europe into the west coast of the US, Canada, Asia, Australia, managing teams across those time zones. So I can probably share some war stories on that.
Yep, that's like that west coast time zone thing. So, does anything immediate spring to mind from people? Like, is there I've got a question about that.
Yeah, there's 2 Scousers in the room. That was quite freaky.
So where are you from originally?
Wavertree.
Wallasey. Not a real Scouser.
What Moslins or Aldershot?
Moslins?
Me too.
No.
Went to the same school.
You were joking me.
That's weird.
That's weird.
I'm obviously younger though.
So one of my things is like, what is it about? It's got to be like a tech question, because something now it's just I just make people use Zoom, but there was this period a few years ago where it was like, so we're going to use like this or this or this or this, and like how do you govern that? Like, do you just make people use one thing and like one app to communicate online, or
one ring to rule them all.
Yeah.
There was a movie on that, wasn't there? Sorry, Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the
Gang.
Rings.
It's okay.
I've never watched it. Anything to do with Marvel, I'm fine. You know, but like in Google, did everyone have to use Google Hangouts?
No, so we used Hangouts and Zoom and WhatsApp and Skype and whatever. Hangouts works really well with Google Docs.
Yeah.
So we would tend internally to use Hangouts far more. If you had somebody without a Gmail address, we'd tend to use something else. So, yeah, I think the kind of culture that I would typically build is not to tell people what to use, but to allow them to use whatever's right. And, you know, there's no point policing these things because you slow everybody down. Just get out of the way and just give them options and let them choose what's best and, you know, what really, really works. And it's interesting moving to a much smaller company now. People use different things, with different customers we use different things, but, you know, there seems to be a consensus growing just in the organisation around how we approach it, which is just really interesting. It organically comes up and becomes like a norm of behaviour.
Yeah. So if they select their own system, they'll work better with it. Is that?
Yeah. So we pay a bunch of license fees to a bunch of people selling stuff, both for file sharing and documents and CRM and, you know, video and these kind of things. But people start to gravitate towards a particular platform. So it's good to look at your usage, particularly if you're spending money on more than one platform.
And I wanted to ask you, Peter, is when people come to you and go like, I want to go remote, like, are there like 3 things they always ask that are their starting questions?
I think some of the stuff that we're talking about, that how are we going to know that people are working, and that question is usually from someone who actually doesn't trust themselves to be working away. So I think that the first, rather than the question that they ask me, the first question that I always ask them is to be aware of what it is about their work that they need to keep when they go remote as a team. So my specialism is teams. The first question a lot of the time, if they haven't got an infrastructure, an ecosystem, is the tech. What shall we use? I say, I don't know. What do you need to do? And once you know what you need to do, then you can start to look at what you need to use. And I think that from the point of view of both a freelancer and someone who decides their own technology, and also an organization of a team, is really important, because the tech, there's so much now, and it's really easy to get into the conversation of the tech. What tech shall we use? The exciting thing is to stop and think about, okay, how do we work? And how do we communicate? And what about that thing that we're always saying we're going to sort out and we haven't sorted out yet? And how come we're duplicating work? Okay, let's look at that and let's see what can help us not duplicate work when we go remote.
And does the length of that process depend on how many people in the team? Or does it depend on how aware they are of what they're doing?
A couple of things. So how aware they are already of how they operate, because if you know how you're operating, you're going to know what you can let go of faster and what you want to keep. How used people are also to working in this way, how well they know each other, how much trust there is, etc., etc. And size, yes, of course, but maybe 4 people can have a more difficult process than 20. It really depends.
That makes me want to ask you, because when you, in your little introduction, there's people that don't want to work remotely.
Yeah.
That made my ears prick up. Can you say a bit more about that?
So you sometimes find people who working remotely really fits with their lifestyle. Other people, particularly, I think some of this is around recognizing your own personality type, and where you get energy from and how you manage your energy. So as a remote worker, if you're an extrovert, you need to talk to people to actually get energy back. As a remote worker, if you're on your own at home all day with the dog or some other kind of pet, it's very, very hard to kind of get that energy, get that spark, you know, have that conversation that really like turns into something cool. So I would tend to work with team members to help them find a good co-working space where they could hang out, have some friends, have some water cooler conversations, if that's what they want. But other people really love just being on their own, working, and then having a hangout or a Zoom. And then that would be a very different kind of interaction. So yeah, those people who don't want to work remotely tend to be personality types that need people.
Yep. What about, I'm going to take a little poll from the audience here. Who likes being on their own all day and who needs people? Who likes just not talking to anybody?
Who raises their hand?
Yeah. Who raises their hand?
What's that half and half? Yeah, I'm the same in theory.
Yeah.
Depends on how I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm. Like,
And what day it is.
is anyone like extrovert? They just have to be with other people. Because I like being in a place, like being in a co-working space and not talking to anybody, which is quite a nice balance.
Well, one thing that I actually loved about transitioning to remote work was that previously I found that I was just emotionally exhausted at the end of the day. I loved working with people in an office or visiting clients. But then when I got home and it was time to socialize with my friends or my family, I was kind of done and over it. But then in a remote environment, I still had some interaction throughout the day on Zoom calls and everything else. But when I was done for the day, I was so much more excited to go out and see my friends, and I was excited to get out of the house. So I felt like working remotely actually benefited my personal life because the balance of that introvert-extrovert on and off was swapped for the people that I was doing it with. So that was an interesting discovery for me.
That makes sense. A great book. Does anyone know the books The Quiet by Susan Cain? That's my recommended read for like working out where you are on the I like talking to people spectrum. Can
I add just a quick point there? To me, it's like an emotional bank account. There's some things that take money out of that bank account and some things that put money in. And you have to try and keep it roughly level or not go too far overdrawn. And different people get money from different sources going in there, and different people spend money on different things. So it's about self-awareness and recognizing who you are and having that ability to just kind of manage that dynamic over time, avoid kind of particularly, avoiding going into darker places. If you're if you're writing something for a week and really you need to go out and occasionally talk to people, just recognizing that in yourself and putting a structure in place around it. And having co-workers, remote co-workers, who empathize with you, engage with you, and kind of give you that money back into your emotional bank account rather than just acting transactionally. Where I've seen it fail is where people act transactionally and just expect that you're a little kind of black box over there that just produces something and needs nothing emotionally.
Do you have in your teams, and you can chip in on this too, did you have like a check-in every day or a stand-up kind of for everyone on the team to say, I'm alive?
No, but people do. So some people will do it every day, just to say you're alive, and also to check in with the work, maybe also. But for me, I actually prefer rather than doing that. So I have a very small team. I work with one other person who I talk to almost every day in some shape or form, and then some freelancers. But rather than that, what I prefer, rather than having to do it every day, we've got systems where we can find each other and talk to each other. So I find it much more fun to go into a document that I know I'm sharing with someone else and seeing that they're working on it as well, and being able to check in with them then because I found them there.
Put swear words between them.
Yes, and going there and write really big, hello, how are you, in the middle.
I do that.
So we would tend to have like a check-in Slack channel, or equivalent technology therein, where you can just check in with people. That's useful. The other really useful thing is having a one-to-one doc. So just having a private Google Doc between the two of you, particularly if you're working in a matrix rather than a hierarchy. So having that one Google Doc that is private to the two of you.
Before I make film jokes, what is a matrix?
Matrix management.
Yeah.
So instead of managing, I'm your manager, you do what I say, you've just got layers of people working at different levels of work stream.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's a looking after people thing, which is kind of the pastoral care piece that you have generally one person who's working on, but those people could be working on a whole bunch of cool things that you know nothing about as their manager. But if you have that one-to-one relationship, say you and I had a regular one-to-one working relationship, I would encourage us to have a one-to-one doc that's really a backwards rolling just scratch pad of, hey, I need to talk to Bernie about this. Instead of putting it in a channel, which is going to get lost, I'm going to put it in our doc.
Mm-hmm.
It's private to us, we can talk about it. When we get together to meet, we can look at it and go, yeah, we never talked about that thing. So that's my top tip around managing teams, either matrix or hierarchical or virtual in any form, is having that regular one-to-one document where you can dump stuff. You can dump links, you can dump things you speak about. Really, really scrappy, easy to use, just really helpful. Just also can take a lot of emotion out of things. If somebody's feeling like, this is a problem, they can put it in there and park it. It's more like a parking spot.
Sort of blasting off in a Slack channel.
Yeah, or a bad email or something.
Anything come up for anyone there? Hello?
Someone on the phone with a question.
Phone a friend.
I've worked freelance sometimes for clients, and then when they say, well, so how many days are you going to come into our office? And I'm like, well, I don't need to come into your office. I can do this. They're like, but we need to see you in our office. And I'm like, okay, but why? And then, so I've worked with companies as well, where, you know, I try to explain to them, I work on productivity rather than time. And I might be more productive at 8 o'clock at night, and then I'll work till 4 o'clock in the morning. You know what I mean? And some you know, it's adjusting. People are getting used to more people working like this now. I first started working remotely for clients in 2006, right? And telling the clients that I'm going to work for you in a different country and not come into your office, they were like, "This is crazy." Yeah, blew their mind. And it took you know, I got clients, I started my business, I got clients and blah, 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 blah. And one of my clients, who was also a friend of mine, actually said to me a few years later, she said, "Do you know why we kept with you?" And I was like, "Why?" She goes, "Because I knew if I sent you an email at 11 o'clock at night, you'd reply." She says, "And you gained my trust from that." So when I work with my clients and remote people that I'm working with as well, all I say to them is, if I send you a WhatsApp message, just reply. Just acknowledge it. If I send you an email, just acknowledge it. Because that's the most important thing, if, like, when you're trying to work on a project and all that sort of stuff. Okay, I've sent somebody that message. I know, you know, or have they got it? Have they received it? Are they busy? Blah, blah, blah. Just keeping that communication going. And that builds trust with working remotely. Right?
At the same time, what you can do to help build that trust is agree what the acceptable time, for example. So that people know that, well, if you're saying, okay, we're going to expect from each other to reply immediately between these times and these times, but also, hey, if the message is not urgent, you know, take your time and reply whenever. What is acceptable.
I've also worked in different ways with startups as well, where I was part of a global team for a startup, and we had like the company Slack chat, and then you would always get like the passive aggressive messages from the founder. Saying, I'm setting up a separate Slack channel just for you, me and this other person, so we can discuss this private thing. And you're there going, oh my God, how many other these Slack channels are there that I'm not part of? Right? And then, you know, we'd also get like sort of private messages saying, Simon, we are conscious that you didn't reply to these messages in 8 hours. And it's like, well, I was sleeping because you're in Australia. You know, and but you've got to have those rules in you've got to have some sort of base of rules in communication, or you can just get completely lost.
I think going back to what you were saying about times and wanting to see you work, the concept of visible work or results orientated, especially for freelancers, is very useful. I'm working with someone at the moment, I'm helping them organize an online conference, and I didn't quote days or hours. I said, okay, this is it, this is what I'm going to charge you, and this is what I'm going to do. Very basic Excel spreadsheet, this is what I need to do, green, red or amber, and they can go in and see what work, at what stage the work is at. I think from a team level, from a team point of view, to just show, not just for the manager or the employer, also for your team members who might be waiting for you. Just have some kind of system where it's really easy to go online and very quickly visually just see what's going on. But I think that's also important, and agree on it.
School.
Or a Trello board, or the concept of a scoreboard.
Just agree on a form of communication, and what is the minimum communication. You know what I mean? Because it's very difficult sometimes.
But it's not just communication, it's also objective setting.
Yeah.
So if you look at setting it like in a larger organisation using OKRs, we're all familiar with OKRs, objectives and key results. So setting OKRs and using them as the vehicle for outcome-driven thinking rather than hours in the day. You know, you'll get people who say, oh, I've been really successful this quarter because I sent this many emails or this many Slack messages. It's like, dude, I don't care how many you send. what did you achieve? So that OKR process to me is really, really important. I had one guy who worked in Boulder, who is or was the world champion ultra triathlete, some insane swimming 400 miles kind of person, cycling, running, and they do this thing in Hawaii.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of my V.
It's the Ironman. Ironman in Norway.
It's the one above that, it's Ultraman. Anyway, let's not quote the name of the person. If you look up World Ultraman Champion, Google, then you'll probably find
My brain's going like David Goggins and...
Anyway, so he was in my team when I was previously at Google, and awesome guy. We would agree what the OKRs were. He would produce them, he'd nail it the whole time, and during the day he would go off swimming, and then he'd go off for like a 1 hour cycle, and then he'd come back and do stuff and work with people. But he just had different hours to everyone else. And he kind of kicked off about 4 a.m. in the morning and finished about 10 o'clock at night. But all his spare time was put into the day when he went out swimming and running and biking.
That sounds bliss.
And it was like, to me, it was really interesting corporate remote working with just all the normal processes, rituals, etc., being driven by those OKRs, and then him knowing stuff like when are your standing meetings, particularly if you've got team meetings, how we could actually fit those team meetings into the hours he needed, and to try to be sympathetic and supportive of those people. And it's not always possible, but it's really, really important that you help those people based around their own personal circumstances.
Rich Roll talks about that in his book, how he was like out running and cycling,
Yeah.
he'd be on a laptop on his truck working and then off again. I wanted to your name again? Fiona. Do you have any questions about like because it makes it sound horrible now, like controlling people or the accountability? Actually, that's a much more respectable way of putting it.
No, I'm picking up ideas.
I was really hoping for a question then.
But I can speak to that because when I work with teams, most of the things that I'm doing is trying to convince the manager, whoever is managing the team, or the founder, to give the trust first. Benjamin and I were talking about this today. It's like what they don't realize is people are so excited to work remotely and they love the privilege of having the flexibility that they actually really, really want to keep that job. And they're probably going to have the opposite work-life balance than you think. Like people are thinking, oh, they're going to run off and like just play and not actually work, when you need to be cognizant that they're probably going to work more than they should, and there's a possibility of burnout because they want to not lose that opportunity to work remotely. So it's like we have to kind of protect them and create an environment where they can work remotely successfully. Most of my first 4 or 5 years of working remote for different companies was me trying to prove that I was online, let alone get work done. And it's just like, I'm wasting so much time just answering these little messages to prove to you that I'm here, then I could just be doing my deep work.
Come.
Yeah, I'm very interested in this, in the concept of visible work, because when I mentioned that I'm interested in the work rights, is this, how do you establish this trust, and in terms of not of a contract but some sort of policy that so what are the times that you're expected to reply, and this, that a lot of people see this as a privilege and tend to overwork instead of just working the hours that they're paid to productively, and also how are the conditions that they're working when they're working remotely, if they have a house that they have a proper space to work, so because the company is actually not offering that infrastructure. So if how is it built in the house, or if they pay for a co-working space, or if they have to then pay from their own salaries. It's like these are the questions that I kind of have in mind, and or the tools for communicating, who pays for those licenses, and how do you establish these policies and limits so that the people, so the freelancers and employees are not being taken advantage of because they're offered this privilege to work remotely.
So maybe I'll take a stab at the who pays for what thing. The way that I've always worked this is the company pays for the technology infrastructure, the licenses for whichever systems you're using, and provisions you a user. into that, or provisions your own user in-house. You know, there's an important question there around security, being able to revoke users, particularly if people go off-piste with it. So there's a lot of stuff you need to think about there around like how you give people access to your systems, particularly in a regulated industry like financial services. You know, those kind of things are really important. So you'll pay for the licenses, it'll be owned by you, the IP is yours as a business, but that employee is not paying for it. That employee is responsible for the space they work in and being able to work. And I've had employees who've lived in very chaotic spaces, and actually it's not, you know, they've not been able to manage to work properly because of the chaos. And I think as a manager, you then need to go and, you know, you need to have a little bit of radical candor with them, you know, looking after them as a person, but giving them very direct feedback and just saying to them, hey, this isn't working given where you're working. How can I help you find a place that would be better? You know, what do we need to do to get you to a place where you can be really productive, that's not full of a bunch of other people fighting the whole time, or whatever it might be, whatever the reason is. And I think that, you know, the Radical Candor book?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, okay. So Radical Candor is one of my favourite books. Just taking some of the lessons from that around direct feedback that's really caring and that really looks after the person and recognises, you know, why is the person working there? Why are they disrupted? Why are they not able to get things done? How can I help them? How can I coach them? And just helping them get to that point of success.
Especially if you're expecting them to join online meetings and have a quiet space to be able to communicate properly with other people in the team.
But would you say that employer is responsible for paying for a co-working space?
I think so.
No, and
that's how I have it.
Let me tell you why. It may be that if you need to go to a co-working space and there's some kind of subscription for it and it's part of the deal, and you negotiate that up front, then that's fair enough. If I've just got a regular team member working for me and I'm working for a big tech company, whichever one it is, the expectation would be that they are choosing to work more remotely and that they'd figure out, you know, where they're based. The moment you start to pay for that, particularly here in the UK, there's a whole bunch of tax implications and the whole thing gets really messy. So I wouldn't necessarily go down the route of paying for spaces unless it's access to a particular co-working space and it's a policy that's available for everybody.
So would the view on that be like you're saving on travel? So, you know, there's a lot of stuff you're not paying for, like travel and stuff like that, so you can just invest in your own co-working space. So I see where you're coming from. It sounds a bit like you can work remotely, but you have to sort yourself out.
It tends to work like that. I totally take your feedback. It does just tend to work like that. People say, I'd like to work remotely this many days a week, 5 days a week, 1 day a week, whatever it is. And you're like, okay, well, we can work around that. Where are you intending to work? People generally don't come back and say, okay, I need £15 a day for this particular co-working space and I need money for coffee and my lunch, because you normally lay lunch on. It tends to be a lot more, okay, we're giving you freedom, you're choosing what you do, and with that choice comes responsibility. I know you love Marvel.
I can do this all day.
Okay.
I also think, coming back to the point about culture also, if it depends on, I mean, I did point also about the tax implications of it. Everything comes with tax implications also, just does the, especially when you're a freelancer and the place of work is going to be your home, does that have tax implications, etc. But I think if a company or organization really wants to embrace the concept of allowing people to choose where they're working from, then I think that's something that says we're going to help you. The money that we're going to end up saving, because actually if this goes like this, we're going to start to reduce the office space and that's going to save us some money. And we're going to help you find the best setup for you, whether that's membership of a co-working space, whether, I mean, lots of distributed companies will give you coffee money if you want to go and work in a coffee shop, whether it's a pair of wireless headsets so that you can really, whether it's to pay for your standing desk. I think this is such an important question because I've seen this. Oh, we're going to have, can you come and help us for our people to work from home? And you go to their offices and the people have two monitors, great desks, and then you find out that most of the workforce are young people. And
Yeah.
you think they're going to have space at home?
That's
And that is a really, really important question. And actually, even if if the request comes from a person to have this very honest conversation with them at the beginning, have you thought about how this is going to work with them? Do you have the space? A company that I was helping to put a pilot together, they were in Spain, so legislation's really strong, and they were half with the government. They had a questionnaire that people who wanted to work from home had to fill in, like a place. Do you have a place without a draft? Do you have a good check? Blah blah blah. So the stuff that can be I think it's really important what you're saying.
There's been some conversations at like co-working conferences, like bigger corporations have come to the co-working conference because part of their thing over the next few years is to reduce their real estate, and then they want to know where to send people. And there's some other co-working spaces that have been, on the receiving end of this, and they've had there was one from a government organisation, and they had someone come in and measure everything in the building, like how far is the distance from the the toilet, how many steps do they take every day, is the tap the right height, and it's like this was just like exhausting. And when the people got in there, it was that they didn't fit with the space because they were nice people, but they were so used to these boundaries or whatever you call them. It didn't work, but it was very interesting how these two worlds are merging and colliding, I'd say.
So you say a really interesting thing there, and I think there's a category of remote working we've not touched on here, and it's remote working in the office. So if you look at the way Google Offices work and the way the kind of Google Office magic works and the way it's designed, there are desks. No one ever sits in the desks. So most of the desks are empty most of the time, and people are remote working around the building or around the buildings. So you'll tend to ping people and find where they are and potentially have a hangout, and they may well be in just like an adjacent building to you, but they just happen to be there, or they've gone on, the Google offices generally have lots of co-working spaces in the offices. So you'll be working in one of the co-working spaces and talking to other people who are in your office remotely. I might be in St. Giles, they might be up in King's Cross. We don't have to be physically co-located. So the fact that we're using video particularly facilitates that very well. And the fact that you're issued, great laptops with cameras, headphones, all those kind of things. You've got a great network wherever you go. It's a little bit more like working in a university, is the experience of working in that kind of corporate. Like you're on the university campus somewhere, and you're going to probably connect digitally to people. They'll be like, hey, where are you? Are you close to me, or should we just have a Zoom or a Hangout? And that tends to be the way, that kind of on-site remote working.
How many video conversations did you have a day? Was there this impression that was like
constant?
Yeah.
Most of the day.
So how did you did you have to get any work done, or was that your work just?
You're talking about deep work.
Yeah.
Like where you just like focus on the thing. Yeah.
So I think role is important in this conversation. So if you understand who you are and what your role is in the organisation, then deep work might be coordination, it might be coaching. As a leader somewhere like Google, your main role is a coach. That's what you do. It's coaching, it's helping people set objectives, it's getting friction out of the way, it's removing obstacles for them. So you spend all your day trying to give to those people so that they can do the deep work. Now, if they are a developer or an engineer, or they're writing stuff, or they're creating kind of marketing campaigns, whatever it is, their role is to do that deep work, as you describe it. So they would be on video far less. But there's a role-based element to that as to what your percentage split would tend to be.
And did you have a desk and just not very often go there, or were you just...
Yeah, I hate desks.
Yeah.
They're just, desks and me don't kind of...
Was there like a thing with like Dave Keen's desk and you never got...
Well, no, it's just a desk, and it's like you're supposed to kind of... Some people love their desk and they make it beautiful, and they have plants and pictures and like awards and all of that kind of stuff and swag. Other people are more nomadic, and they're like, oh, is that my desk? Right, okay, thanks. I'll be in the coffee space over there, sat on the floor, because actually I can get more done in there.
That's cool.
Sorry.
I've got a question. It's some really logical arguments being said about why you let, if you want to remote work, just do your own thing. But I'm wondering, if you think about a lot of corporate or fast-growing businesses, the amount of perks and extras in the office and the slides and the massage rooms and the sleep rooms, and I'm kind of going like, and actually not just good, but loads of them. I'm kind of going, that doesn't correlate in my brain between. I wonder if it's a supply and demand issue of how, if eventually remote work becomes about there's a talent shortage for remote work. If remote work scales and grows to double, triple, quadruple, and goes exponential, then I wonder if the conversation will be forced then of how you help people. Like here's all the perks if you go remote because we want you, because we're desperate for the talent. I wonder if that actually might shift things, or in terms of people maybe they will remote work anyway, or they need help with just any aspect of it. So for me, there's a mismatch between if you remote work, no, just go off you go, but if you're working in the office, you get all the extras. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. There's one thing I've read, and I don't know whether it's just like future of work, urban myth or medium, but and you two can comment, is that people would rather have the autonomy of working remotely than they would a gym membership and a.
It's true.
Yep. That's that one.
The perks are meaningless.
Yep.
Seriously, I didn't use the sleep pod once in 7 years. I didn't use the massage actually once in 7 years. Some people love it and go regularly. It was just not my thing.
Yeah.
So all of those perks, one of the kind of hidden secrets of the perks are why do you have perks? You have perks to reduce the cost of talent acquisition. Because when you take people around an office, they go, oh, I must work in here. Look, we have a barista. Look, you're allowed to bring your dog to work. Look, there's a restaurant with amazing food. You can have a sleep during the day. After you've been there 3 months, they become invisible. You just become used to them as like the norm. And then the question in your mind will be, do I want to spend an hour or 45 minutes on the central line, or so that I can get a free coffee, or will I just kind of walk up the street for a free coffee and pay for it myself? So I think the perks thing gets played out a lot in narrative that I hear. The people who are working in those big corporate spaces tend not to see the perks, and they become very entitled as well. It's like, why are there no oysters today? You're like, there was just none on. There was none in the market. We're really sorry. And like the internal conversations around, particularly avocados, just in we've not had ripe avocados for 3 days. This is outrageous. So there's this incredible entitlement that starts to come with those perks. And I'm not sure it's massively constructive, to be honest. It's a way of reducing the cost you have to pay recruiters, so that you can just get people to line up to work there. And I think the thing that I would say, the most positive thing that we saw was actually, probably coffee and the ability to bring animals to the office. They're the two that really move the dial with people. So being able to bring a dog to the office, and just really great coffee, they would be the two that got most used.
So what day is it? On Thursday's episode of the 21st Century Work Life podcast, my colleague Maya and I discussed an article called 5 Workplace Perks You Didn't Know You Wanted. And it's a short article for the BBC, and it says, it's got 5. One is making dreams come true, and this is something that I've seen a company called Accelerants, how they treat their workers. They say, okay, what would you like to do? And they help, so they're changing the nature of the perks, and I think this is where the conversation hopefully will go, that the perks become more meaningful. So making dreams come true, you're talking about fraternity leave. So instead of taking paternity leave, you take some leave for the dog or your pet, free travel, nap pods.
Really, the nap pods are not a thing.
And then unlimited holidays. So I think that hopefully the nature will, and the choice, maybe there'll be more choice. So you say, okay, if you're coming into the office, you can have these perks. But if you're not coming into the office, maybe these are the perks we can offer you. This is how we're going to show you that because perks are about recognition, aren't they? And about being shown that you're valued. And that's what perks are. It's about value.
I want to jump on Phil's question.
Well, it's just on the video stuff, more of an observation and a question that I might respond to it. But the thing video is quite interesting, and one of our clients, Cisco, always talks about the fact that one of the things that's just changing how this becomes more effective is about video quality. So they provide WebEx, and one of the things they do is kick people out, all the sales execs, with decent equipment to work from home, so they don't all have to come in. But he says that when the video quality goes up, the communication gets better. If you think back to video quality, particularly on poor broadband, you've got quite a fuzzy picture, and then you miss all of the non-verbal cues that you get when you communicate with people. But with high-def video, you actually get the quality, and you feel like you're in the room with somebody, and that's the bit that's just starting to be resolved through better connections and better hardware as well. Just wonder whether people agree with that, or whether they think there's other tech bits that we're waiting for.
I'm going to go against what you're saying there, largely because in the consumer world, I think we've had great quality video for a long time. I mean, we've been all Skyping people for kind of forever.
It's bandwidth dependent though.
It is bandwidth dependent, but
so many calls are like.
It's not.
Who uses Skype anymore?
Exactly.
But I'm talking about that from olden days. Zoom, Hangouts, WhatsApp, other kind of video services. Even if you're just on your phone and you're walking down the street, you can have a great video call with people. So I don't think there's a technology problem anymore with it, particularly with using those consumer technologies in the workplace. I think one of the barriers in many businesses is they won't actually whitelist the consumer technologies. They're just being forced down the route of kind of go-to meeting, kind of like things that you have to pay a lot of money for. And the consumer technologies are there, they work. People regularly talk to their relatives and stuff long distances away. My daughter's currently travelling in Cambodia, and we're quite happy to have a WhatsApp call from her phone there to my phone here, and it's great. And you get the verbal cues.
It's unbelievable you can do that nowadays. Just like take it for granted.
Yeah.
Is that like that big Cisco board thing where you can, and there's like the huge life site?
That's telepresence. They don't hand them out. They're very expensive.
They are.
But no, they just give them decent monitors with a webcam in the right place, and it's all built in, and it just is a high.
I think it's interesting what you say about the verbal, the non-verbal cues, because that there's something big there. Benjamin's nodding.
Yeah, there's some things we've experimented with, kind of ambient presence, which is this idea of just leaving the webcam on in the office and where the person is, just so that they're kind of connected with what's going on. It doesn't work for everything, but it was definitely a kind of interesting experiment for a while when we had new
A lot of you must know this. A lot of maker spaces do that. They have a camera on, and then every so often everyone like leers up to the camera with a sign. But that's a cool little cultural thing, isn't it?
I would go, my fear is that a lot of the people transferring to start working remotely as teams is that there's too much reliance on meetings, and what I'm missing is finding different ways of I'm going back again to making teamwork visible, so that we're not relying on meetings to know what's going on, to share our ideas, to find creativity amongst us. So is using the technology in all these other ways that actually give us more flexibility also, and that can then balance out those people that work very well in meetings and those people that actually prefer to have more measured kinds of communication, and that, like the person you were talking about, who've got very different schedules.
Yeah.
So it's really great from the point of the social connection. It's really important, and that's what those meetings are really great at, that you probably don't get in another part of the communication on the
Can you
side.
set that platform we used to be on together?
So Coco, but now I can talk about Remo. Yeah.
Gee, tell us about Remo, because that room, I thought, so there was an online co-working space, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever, and then I ended up hating it. I was really surprised.
So there's a very interesting, so that was an interesting experiment. So my friend and I opened a community on Slack called Virtual Team Talk. And so we just communicate on Slack, so mainly text-based stuff. And then there's this American company called Sokolko, where they started in Japan maybe. And they have a presence, it's a presence app. So it's really sweet, and it's really beautiful. It's like an office plan. It's got different rooms, and you can see who is in each room as an avatar, just a circle. And then if you're in a room with people, then you can switch on your camera, you can switch on your mic, and you can share screens, everything. So it's like different rooms, like an open office. And we had that as a co-working online space. So sometimes we'd go there and you'd see that so-and-so is in the quiet room and so-and-so is in the yoga room. It was very playful. Almost nobody was ever there. Because you could see on Slack who was online. If you wanted to talk to someone, then maybe you did it in a thing that actually had a bit better video, and that was really interesting. And the same, and Remo, that is a very similar platform, also had that, and now they're moving towards online events. Because this platform that I was in an event with Brittnee last week is a platform where you have lots of tables, and so as a participant, you don't just sign on and then see someone talking to you and interact by the chat. You can actually go to talk to the other participants in these little tables, and you choose where to go. And that kind of thing where you have the choice to go and talk to different people, it's a really nice platform
That sounds cool.
for events. Yeah.
I want to sort of throw this out there, because it always seems like people in my family who are like, have real jobs like lawyers and doctors and accountants, and my brother-in-law's worked for 27 years for the same bank, and he says he always just in his conversation, and I'm really picking on the language here, he goes, my sister will say, Darren's allowed to work from home, and I'm like, what do you mean he's allowed to work from home? This is like the 21st century. And does that strike a chord with people about being allowed to work from home, or allowed to remote? You picked up on this at the beginning, didn't you?
Yes, I completely agree with you, especially with the corporate banks. It is changing. But I remember when I started out years ago, it was you were allowed to work one day from home, but don't tell anyone. It's not something that's shared openly that you be allowed to work from home. It is changing a little bit to, I think, predominantly get more women back into investment banking.
I mean, back into investment banking.
There's a lot of women that obviously leave because you're not moving very well, or you've had a career break.
I thought that joke would land better than that, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Always get that. So, flexible working, remote working is being introduced back in, but it's still, I guess, labelled as, I'm allowed to work from home, as opposed to it's just the way it is. If you work better remotely, then that's what you will do.
Yep. Anyone else?
I think that goes back to this thing of being like it's a privilege to work remotely, whereas this work, like you were saying, is the same kind of work. You're just as productive, and you shouldn't be viewed as, in my opinion,
Second.
No, it just shouldn't be viewed as you're allowed to work from home as a perk. Again, is you're doing the same work for.
Always occurred a little bit like school-like, like Bernard's been very good this week.
Yeah,
you can,
exactly.
You can go in the play area, while Malcolm over here, he has to stay in the office.
Like we usually use to accommodate remote work, because we are not completely remote company, but we do accommodate remote work from time to time depending on circumstances, and there's a long policy on how it works, because also we realize that if we don't say anything, it's just you can work remotely and we'll cover your expenses on co-working or etc. No one takes it. I think it's the same thing, and I've seen research on unlimited holiday days that people feel pressured, and they don't take any holidays. They actually take less holidays, and then if you say your holidays is X amount of days, and the same thing happened with remote work. Whereas if you have a complete transparent policy and a process on how you communicate your remote days or months or whatever, and how you submit the expenses and things like that, then it actually works very, very well.
I think there's an extra piece on that policy. I think policies can often be hierarchical and top-down, where somebody in an office who's been there for 20 years goes, here's my policy, this is what's going to happen, I am Moses.
Everybody always have that policy.
I am Moses, I am going to lay down the decision here. I think there's a kind of agreement rather than policy that's needed, and that agreement might be different by team. So particularly if you're working in a team that's more globalized, you know, and the agreement might be around behaviors as well as stuff like costs. You know, so it might be, having worked for US companies a lot, in the evening it would be roughly their lunchtime, so everyone would rock up with a bowl full of salad and chatting to each other like it was lunchtime, and it's late in the evening, you know, for you. And part of the agreement, because everyone got really upset about it, part of the agreement we had was that if there was somebody that was remote and it wasn't their lunchtime, people wouldn't bring their lunch into the meeting. They'd have their lunch, you know, as some other thing, and they wouldn't sit there eating or laughing and kind of banging pizza trays and stuff and damaging your ability to hear them. So there's a whole bunch of that, like, what's the norms of behaviour that we agree as a team, as a group? You know, how do we respect each other? How do we feed back? You know, how do we check in and check out? And all of those kind of things. And I think figuring out that kind of almost like a wiki agreement of, kind of a co-working wiki agreement of like, what's the norms of behaviour that we should have as a team when we do this? And that's so important, rather than it being just a hierarchical top-down force thing.
I'm in a cult, and we all work remotely, and we use Trello, and we use Slack, and we use a thing called Lumio, which is an online decision-making tool. And there's a handbook that comes with it, and it's a very loose, fluid place, but it's like you have to, the only rule is you have to read the handbook, which is like rewritten every year by the team.
Yeah, that's how we call it, is the handbook. The team handbook.
And everybody, even like really chilled people, you know, intentionally chilled people, like, have you read the handbook? And I never read these things because I'm just too cool. But when I read the handbook, everything became apparent. And it is, and there's very subtle things. We have a check-in every day, and it's almost better to not do any work and check in, so everyone knows what, like, gauges where we are, because we're all in different countries. I wanted to ask, like, what is a sort of remote working therapy session, like, what are the challenges that have come up? Like, I remember I'll give you an example, like the first time I triumphantly went to Argentina to work remotely, like it said in the base camp rework book, I was like, here we go, and the internet where we were in Argentina was rubbish. You know, everything went wrong, and I couldn't work properly for like 3 weeks, and life finished, and I sort of came back wounded. But like, what challenges have people had, either getting in sync with people, or time zones, or like the thing from
time zones and food are always bad.
When
other people are eating and it's late at night for you, and you're like, oh please, can we get on with this? Figuring out when people want to be social and when people don't want to be social. Distractions in the room at the other end.
Noise levels.
I think it's really hard when people don't realize what it's like to work remotely, and then they're just having these like side conversations, and you're the only one that's working remotely, and you can't hear what they're saying, but you feel awkward speaking up, and like.
When they have a meeting with one laptop in the table, and
it's most of my remote work life.
Long meetings.
You just have to keep an air horn, so like one hand when people do that. That's a rule we had. It's like if people are having side conversations you can't hear, it's like remote worker can air horn in. It's like, remember me, please.
I think there's something that's really interesting too, though, about having a remote allowed, I think, is what you mentioned here, is worst case versus a remote first environment. Because I know in the past it's been always interesting if you have some people in the room and some remotely, that's inevitably going to happen. But when you adopt, we call it on-campus co-working, something of that nature, everyone's in the same building more or less, it's still calling in from their computers. Even that small shift, I found, can make a huge difference.
Yeah, that's huge, because whenever I've been in a team of, which is quite often where I'm the only remote worker, I've really struggled. I won't cry now, but I was surprised. I just assumed they knew what to do, and so did they, and we didn't.
Well, and this is maybe a question for all of the panelists, is how do people who aren't in a remote obvious or remote first environment almost be that advocate to start making those changes?
Great question.
In some instances, it's easier than others, team size. If you're already in
I've always just advocated for remote work. Like when I worked in corporate law, I was like, this will save you money. This will save us, you know, court fines if we miss this paperwork, if we make everyone paperless and we create systems that work and fluidity of like workflow process. So that's always worked for me. And then I would make people who, if there was some of us working remotely and some of us in office, I made everyone go on their laptops and Skype in or call in together, so we were all on video, which is I think a really interesting concept. Even if you just try it for a couple times, so then everyone knows what it feels like to be on video in the meeting, and it's not just like 5 people in a room and 1 person like on video. That's helped me.
I like the idea of kind of remote only, maybe not even remote first, because that assumes that there is like hardcore 3 people who come and then have conversation at the coffee place afterwards together and like debrief each other. So remote only I really like. I very recently did, I was telling Bernie, did Seth Godin's Alt MBA, which is a really interesting remote only experience where you never get together as a person unless you happen to go off and just get together with people from your location. I mean, that's a great experience of doing some really cool stuff in a self-organized remote kind of working room. There's a ton of good stuff you can learn from that. Really amazing program if you're tempted to try it. Agreeing norms of behavior, showing respect and empathy for people, like understanding what time they're in. Understanding as well that they might have constraints that they can't just kind of get out of, and it's not a big deal if their kids come in and say hello to you on the screen. That's actually really nice.
Unless you're on BBC One News. Peter?
So I think also to try to really pinpoint what it is that the remote person is missing that needs to be addressed. So meetings can be one, running them, but there's lots of stuff that happens outside the meetings that we miss out. So all the conversations that the remote person does not overhear. So taking, for example, going back to visible teamwork, it's taking the concept of open conversations. Let's face it, the amount of conversations that are now had in text or online in Teams, regardless of where they are located. So it depends on the level of trust, because how much you can speak up, also how much you feel like you can speak up. But you can always speak to someone and start saying, can you just always double catch yourselves if you're having a conversation that you think would be of interest to me? Can you either send me a summary, or if you're going to have it in a private email or in a private Slack channel, can you have it in the open if it's possible? Can we have a system whereby you guys are seeing what's on the screens that you're passing by? We have a system where I see it as well? Can we use shared documents online as agendas for meetings? Can we co-create them? Can we use the Trello? So it's finding the ways that can also benefit the whole team. And the other day, I think it was in one of the documents of the event the other day, someone was saying that they'd actually put a picture, they'd ask for a picture of them to be in the office so that people would remember that they're there. So I think, and it's true, if you're suddenly, we didn't tell them that, because so really identifying what the things are and seeing if there's 1 or 2 things that you can ask to change. And the other, maybe, I think, calling in, picking up the phone if that's suitable to at least a couple of people, just so that you're not calling only when things are not going well.
I think there's a celebration piece as well that you miss out on the remote working piece, where it's like those rituals that we would put in place when we're all working in the same place of, a wash up at the end of the week, kind of a little bit of a download, maybe a beer between, each. Some of those rituals, figuring out ways of doing that, figuring out how do you celebrate when you're all remote and maybe you can't travel to be together. So figuring out different ways of doing it. We once did a remote Christmas party, which was a little weird, but was actually funny. So everyone was remote. And everyone figured out what they were going to have. And so we just agreed like a 2 hour, we didn't do it for too long, we did it for 2 hours. And it was actually really funny. And we had some games that we did. So we just did some games using Hangouts.
I remember the celebration bit on the sets course about working remotely, and I thought it was so weird. It was like great, but it was like
Episode 200, all
Episode
about celebrations.
of the remote work podcast.
What other ideas? I'm really interested. What other ideas have you got where you can celebrate and?
I have a really good story for that. So I was telling them before, I got absorbed by a bigger consultancy firm last year, and I was going all over Asia, like doing design thinking, agile, Scrum, but most of the time I was doing partnerships and business development remotely, like from Thailand, and my team was in Malaysia. And we did a stand-up check-in, I can't remember, it was every morning or every couple days something, but they had planned, it was my birthday, and they had planned it out where they sent a cake from Malaysia to Thailand, and it would arrive at my door the moment our check-in happened. So like I was on the video call with them, and then I was like, sorry guys, someone's at my gate, and I go out and it's like a box, and I'm like, oh my god, someone sent me a birthday cake, you guys, I'm so excited. And then they no one said anything, and I opened the card and it was like from my team, and I started crying, and it was really nice.
Oh.
But that's so, I don't know if you guys realize how hard it is to mail things in Thailand, the fact that they had it timed, and cakes, I don't know if it came all I know is like mailing things in Thailand is terrible already, and then the fact that it all was perfectly
I was
timed.
impressed with the timing. That was
Yeah.
I had kind of a similar thing, but I was working remotely in Brazil, and it was my birthday, and the team had a cake to celebrate my birthday, but they had a cake. So it's not so exciting, but I think that's sweet anyway.
They had a
Yours
cake.
is like,
They ate a cake on your behalf?
yeah.
That's not really a celebration, is it?
I thought that was sweet, but now I'm like,
But at least they remembered.
So one other tip that we've done is birthdays. So just creating a slide deck, a Google slide deck, which is a birthday card where everyone just creates their own like one slide, like with whatever creative they want in there. And then at least people have put some energy and effort into it from like their remote locations. They've got their one slide each. They've done whatever. Some people will just be like, happy birthday, well done, another year. Other people will go to amazing creative lengths with that one slide. And then on the birthday, you send a Slack message to them on your announcement channel or whatever saying, happy birthday, here's your birthday card from us all, and it's just a slide deck.
That's so cute.
Do you like that?
Yeah, I do. I'm gonna
So
implement that.
that's quite a nice one. That works really well, like 100% digitally.
I have I'd like to shift gears a little bit from the celebration to because the event you two took part on last week was about remote working and mental health, and I wondered if we could bring that up, because that's a massive thing. Like as you said at the beginning, if you like spend all day, like one of the big cases about going to a co-working space is people talk a lot about it in forums and online, is that if you just like stay at home, you will go stir crazy and have cabin fever and be cleaning under the sink and licking the doors and not really realise what was going on. And maybe you have something, maybe that came up in last week's.
Yeah, I mean, most people were sharing about how it's. I was talking to Benjamin about this earlier, but when a lot of people don't want to work, they don't want their teams to work remotely because they're worried about losing team culture. But that's something that we need to talk about anyways, especially. I was reading this article recently where it was saying like a lot of people don't go to church as much anymore. A lot of people don't know their neighbors, and so like your whole community is based in the office. And as employers, we need to be responsible for this and like create environments that are healthy for our employees. And then if they're remote, it's like even more of something that you need to look at. So like your culture is something you need to look at anyways, whether you let them work remotely or not. And if you're doing it a remote work culture, it's like an opportunity to set up a really nice, healthy environment for them if you take the effort to do that. And this is something that we're all looking at. I think right now remote work is kind of a buzzword in health and wellness, which is fine if that gets people talking about it. But I think it's just an opportunity for people to start looking at health and wellness more. And like, are we made to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day? Are we like, is this a good thing for our bodies and our minds? And I don't think it is. So if this is a good conversation to have right now, I think it all is like a really nice thing. And people, we had like tons of breakout discussions about it, coming back and how to integrate it in our teams. And this is where, async communication comes in. And I think it's something that should be utilized more and more, where you don't have an active online button. You just give your people the tasks. You have check-in meetings if you need to, and then you let them work and you trust them to do it.
Yeah, I work much better like that. What came up at the remote working mental health for you?
Something that didn't come up actually was the fact. I believe you can be even happier if you're in this kind of setup, because you then connect. You can choose a little bit more the conversations you have. Maybe we were going back to what we were saying before about the energy. Sometimes that you have to be around the people that are there, that have been chosen for you. Whereas if you're working remotely, you might be able to pick the environment in which you are happiest, especially if you're choosing a co-working space, for example. You might choose an environment that is better for you than going into the office every day. So I think that that is not looked at enough, the fact that sometimes it is stressful to go into an office for some people, or if you're the wrong fit culturally. So you're right, this is all part of a wider conversation. I think the opportunity also lies on the flip side of what Brittnee is saying, which is finding your community wherever you are happiest. So if remote work allows you to find your community in your neighborhood or with another interest group, that there is space for that. And it's almost like you need to be giving both options and building ecosystems for both of that. One is, the people who really find their purpose at work and are going to connect at work. How do we do that? How do we encourage also, especially in organizations, people to have those informal networks? So that if I am having a really, really bad time and I live on my own in a city and I'm having a really bad time at work, and suddenly I realize that the only people I know are my manager and my team, because my organization doesn't have systems for me to build my informal network everywhere else, that might create an issue. So I think it's a very holistic view of what are the different issues.
One of the issues is that we're all discussing this in a, I work for a cool company and work for myself, and there's like millions of people on Upwork and whatever freelancer.com and Mechanical Turk, and they're working remotely, and some of those people, their economic reality will be like really harsh, they have to do that, or so it always sounds like. I think it sounds very cool, working remotely. And I was at a talk with Mark from Herman Miller, and he was like joking about remote work, and there's all these cliche iStock photo pictures of people they've always got an Apple Mac, MacBook Air, like on a rock or on a mountain, working remotely, and that's the sort of image it conjures up. Whereas most of it is like sort of holding your earbud in your ear in a noisy cafe or something like that. So there's these. I'm not sure where I'm going with that. But
we need to find different terms for remote work, because remote work means freelancing, it means online collaboration, it means outsourcing, it means 2 days from home, it means fully distributed. So maybe we start, at some point, maybe the conversation needs to start to segment itself, because they all offer different challenges.
Thank you for saving me there.
In the corporate world, one interesting thing that we've done quite a lot of is host managers. So you'll actually have a team of people who are distributed, like all around the planet potentially, and then you'll identify who is the local host manager for this person that's responsible for well-being and looking after that person. And they're not responsible for any of their outputs. They're responsible for just checking in that person's okay, for taking them to lunch, for like, hey, something bad's happened to you, let's look after you, make sure everything's okay, someone else that they can go to. And I do wonder, that's not abnormal in the corporate world to do that. I'm wondering in the kind of more co-working freelance work, where there's some kind of like, co-working family member kind of thing. There's a role there that I think is missing maybe around like, who's the person that checks in and looks after you? Who's the person that's like, hey, are you okay?
We have every 3 months we call it mentor. The mentor changes, and it is that that one-to-one thing. And part of that is because it's very much like when you join it, you have to work out how it all works out, and then you have to kind of work your way through the team. So it's always like I don't want to say senior, but a more established member of the team is looking after the new person, and that's the way the flow works. But it's great to be able to go and in the check-in channel. I don't know why, but everyone on our team has mental health issues, or just maybe they're very open with them. There's my colleague in New York has massive anxiety, and we're always swapping tips on anxiety beating. But it's so bloody lovely to have a Slack channel where people are just very open, and it's encouraged to say instead of making up. Oh well, a lot happened today. It's it just wasn't happening today. I had to tap out, and you have a certain amount of responsibility to, make sure what you were going to deliver gets delivered either on, you re-establish your deadline, or make sure someone else does it for you. But that's very important. And actually, in that environment, that particular work environment compensates for where things are missing all the way around. And not everyone in my co-working space would I go into and say oh dear, everyone's leaving me, whatever's going on. But it's so important.
Might just be catching up and having a coffee or lunch. We run Donut around location. Donut on Slack.
Oh, yeah.
So Donut, for anyone who's never used it, Donut is just a thing that will randomly select somebody from a particular community to have lunch with you, and it'll say, hey, we've matched you with this person.
Digitally.
Yeah, digitally. Lunch Ninja is another one. There's a bunch of them. And it's and it will just nudge you. It'll go, hey, have you arranged lunch with this person yet? And it's just more hey, go have lunch or a cup of coffee with a random person, and build friends and kind of just people you chat to, rather than just people you transact with.
Yeah.
Is that a separate Slack channel?
It's an app. Donut is an app.
But it's can it add on to your Slack community or integrate and it integrates into your Slack community, so you can use it. Right?
And then it connects you with like-minded.
No, it's just in your community. It will randomize. It'll just go, hey.
So if you have a Slack team, it'll pair you with two teammates. Brittnee, should we wrap up the?
I was going to go for the. We're coming to the end of our time here. Link in the show notes. So is there anyone one last dying question before? One last closing question, sorry. Never is, but I just thought I'd ask. So, Brittnee, would you like to tell us where we can find people online?
Yes, so I'll put links for all of these amazing people into the follow-up email that I'm going to send out. I guess I'll just let you guys tell people where to find you right now also. You can find me on LinkedIn. My name's Brittnee Bond. I also have a YouTube channel called Remote Collective, so if you're not subscribed, you should subscribe. We're doing an event tomorrow night with Guy over there in the corner about co-living, and that's happening at Mainyard Studios.
So cool.
I'm doing another event next week in Berlin around remote work, and just keeping the fire going. And then, do you want to tell people where to find you, or if you want to plug something?
David Keane on LinkedIn, fintech_CMO on Twitter.
Google Plus.
I think that might have gone. I work on Christopher Street near Liverpool Street, so ping me if you want a cup of coffee, or if you've got mental health issues you'd like to discuss, or even just a chat.
I can find.
You see, you never come and see me anymore.
I will come and see you now. Well, it's too, because where the remote work, so where the co-living thing is our co-working space in Mile End, which is right by Mile End Tube, which is also 4 minutes from Liverpool Street. Yes. Pilar.
virtualnotdistant.com, and on Twitter, Pilar OT.
Very, very good podcast. And do you still do the NAF Word podcast? Every year you would have words that have been bludgeoned to death, like community
we didn't.
collaboration.
2 years we did that.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Fun, yes.
Okay, folks. So you don't have to go home, and you can stay here for a little bit. And thank you very much for watching online. Everyone wave. I forgot about that. I always forget that. Okay. Round of applause, everyone.